Sure. Let's continue the discussion. So, where we left off, we were exploring Ableton. In fact, the specific Ableton session that I'm going to be using in a couple days. And we can certainly field some questions about that. We can field some questions about the sort of the bounds of Logic. We didn't really get too much of a chance to talk about music businessy stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, like I was sort of saying in the last talk, all of this is couched in wanting to be as effective as possible, wanting to be as happy as possible, wanting to be as inspired as possible, wanting to make sure that we're making a difference in the musical sphere and elsewhere as well. Because if we can find ways to foster our own creativity, to foster our own exploration, then we can only sort of be propelled farther through that exploration. So, talked about a bunch of things in the last hour. Were there any specific questions about any one of the things that I talked about? Might be easier for you to hear your question. Yeah, folks, maybe the yellow hat. And if you could just introduce your name also when you're speaking, that'd be great.
Cool. I'm Tyler, and I had a question about using track sessions live. The band that I'm in, we're building out track sessions to try to bring like the studio sounds to a live audience.
Totally.
I was just wondering, like, if you had any tips on like making it still feel live, because we're finding that we're having to kind of prune back a lot of the tracks that we're using because it kind of feels artificial almost.
That's a great question. Okay, so I'm just sort of making a very untechnologically savvy sort of map so I can remember folks' questions and folks' names as we go through this. So two things. One big thing is, and I didn't know this until I almost said it was way too late. I still have plenty of years ahead of me, but I feel like I should have known this earlier. If you're bouncing out audio, especially that's been pictured, bounced, designed in stereo, you're going to sort of want that to be bounced and iterated out in the house as stereo as well, because there's sort of movement in the sound. And often when folks are, playing tracks, I don't know if this is the situation that you're in. And if it is a situation that you're in and you're bouncing it out like stereo, one side, click, one side, you're bouncing multiple like through it.
So we're using like full track sessions, like one output for every group. And then we're using just separate outputs for click and guide.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, sorry. This is further developing the question. For those of you who didn't know what I just said, now you know that thing. Definitely always side with at least three outputs, like on each side, and then the click is its own separate thing. I'm running very similar to what Tyler is running, with a typical like 8-track out. One of those 8 is the click / the Karen, and the 7 is split. Specifically, the front of the house can really do a good job of negotiating out what it is that people should be listening to. Now, to answer this question, the thing that I found most recently has so little to do with Ableton and so little to do with tracks and so much more to do with the players themselves and how you get people to play. It's almost as if there was a mathematical equation for parts human / parts, and I'm gonna get back to like talking about Ableton and like what things to take out and what things to not double and stuff like that. But if it was parts, if there was an equation for parts human and part Ableton, for every part Ableton, you have to tell the humans to play more human-esque stuff. And you might be thinking, well, that will overcrowd the situation. That will overcrowd the sonic picture. To some degree, maybe. To some degree, If you listen to like a standard, I don't know what kind of music you're playing, Tyler, but if you listen to pretty standard like live performances that are at a really, really high level, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of playing. There's a lot of really articulate, cool things. There are also really cool breaks that are happening. And you want to make that kind of energy happen. But a lot of times when people are playing to a click, they feel really locked in. And I don't know what instrument you play. But
Saxophone and bass guitar.
oh, you didn't have to tell me. But
Oh,
no, it's fine. It's totally fine. What I was gonna say is that often a lot of that onus falls on the drummer. It sort of falls on the drummer. And what I'll say in the mic is often I'll have a God mic. Do you have a God mic in your setup? Great. Often what I'll say into the God mic is a real quick chop it up. Chop it up just means we got to go to church. I don't care if it's the first song. I don't care if it's the last song. I don't care if we all know that it's only for the next 8 to 16 bars. I need you to go to the next level at this particular moment in time. Now, back to the Ableton side, right? How do you make that happen? Well, you have to pare away anything that's going to really conflict. Some of the times that can be things that are going to conflict, like a direct conflict, like kick. No, you can't have any of that in there. But you have to make sure that the kick is amplified and really sonically pushed in the house in a way that makes any sense. Because if it's not pushed in a way that sort of sounds as if it's in the track, then it's going to sound bad. You're going to sound like a band playing to a recording. And that's not what you want to sound like. You want to sound like one or the other, but wholly on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. You hear what I'm saying? So in the track, take away anything that conflicts. And you have to like do this as a sort of reiterative process of listening to what's there. Listen to people playing along with it, and then go back and make some edits in the track and see if there are certain things that that sort of lock down the picture a little harder than you actually want it locked down, and then strip those components away from your Ableton track to allow for some freedom. And then, you know, as a rehearsal tactic, tell people to chop it up and see if they actually do. You know, this is all a negotiation moving forward. So, you know, if people aren't chopping it up, you know, you got to make sure they chop it up. I hope that answers your question to some degree. I mean, you're so far further than I was at your age of understanding the technology, understanding what you can do, understanding what you can possibly give to a house and how they can mix it. But you ultimately, again, sort of regardless of genre, because I think often about the drummers that James Taylor has play with him. Every single one of those guys can just bash the crap out of a drum set. Just like really, just like they can, if they need to, do that action. And James Taylor can also be some of the funkiest music that you'll ever hear. It can be, but you have to have that in your back pocket at all times when you're playing, because the technology, otherwise it'll sound like it's not meant to be played alongside. Okay, cool. I saw some other hands.
Hello, my name's
Hello.
Bobby. I was just wondering how you made the Karen, like how that came to be.
Great question. So these, I'm even sharing the visual up here, and I should have, you know, as I was talking to Tyler, maybe I should have been talking through like why certain things were taken out and why certain things are mixed to certain different degrees. But you know, again, it's just that process of sort of figuring it out and figuring out what you want to have. These are individual clips that were just pulled from like an online version of someone talking. And they're kept in a folder. I mean, the friend of mine who designed this is so meticulous, and it's really, really helpful. But they're kept in the samples folder that's created inside of this inside of the overarching project folder, and they are brought from project to project to project. So there are like 1,000 of these living on his computer, maybe like 5 or 10 of them living on my computer, of different versions of the same exact file, which is basically a person saying these numbers really fast. Once you have it forever. So what I would say is, if you're looking for a Karen track, either record them yourself, but you probably don't want to hear your own voice multiple times in a track, because you can also put in your own notes. Like if you have, do you have any experience, Bobby, it's Bobby, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any experience with a Karen track? So you can put anything in there if you want to. You can put in notes. You can put in very pertinent reminders. You can also put in nonsensical reminders. Like I'm, you know, personally known for like eating on stage. It's like something that I've been known to do. Like if someone else designed a Karen track, they might put in it like, hey, Drew, put down the buffalo cauliflower and get back to the piano because your entrance is in 8 bars. So like something as sort of trivial as that. Or you could put in something like this. But if you don't want to hear your own voice, because those are the kinds of things that you would say in your own voice, like, hey, just remember we need to speed up over the next 4 bars. Or remember this cut off on 1 or cut off on 3, whatever, stuff like that. If you don't, those are times when you use your own voice for something like this. Go to YouTube, pull down an MP3 of someone counting quickly. You don't want to have it be long because you can't have the audio region span past the amount of time that's here. And then chop it up, put it in a folder, and then plug it in and play. And that's it. As you can see here, the 1 is the only one that gets a little bit of cushion right here.
Can you show us your screen, please?
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. The dangers of having a second screen. I think everyone can see what I see all the time. So yeah, so the 1 gets a little bit of extra cushion right here. Just like how string samples always get a little extra cushion, which of course can make for troublesome mixing later, right? When you try to line everything up and it's all a quarter beat late, something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I would just find someone saying these things on YouTube, download that MP3, chop up the MP3 to very, very short versions of itself, and then you'll be good to go. And you can place them in any folder. And once you put them in, I'm going to share my screen again. Once you put them in, if I were to copy and paste these from one section to another, like these here, they would paste in like succession here, and they would paste across like tempo lines. So like each of these has the tempo, like BPM. Because 80, for example, this is 115. If I put this over here and then paste, it's going to paste at that tempo. So once you got them locked in, you're pretty much good to go. Okay. And that can go across like file lines as well. Cool. There was another question in the back row. On the right side? No, on your left side of the room?
I think that was me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Bob. I was just kind of wondering with Ableton, as far as what you build into it, what are you actually hearing? Like, I'm going to guess you're using in-ear monitors for all of the information that you're getting. So dividing it up between the house and your ears. So what you're hearing and what's going out.
Yeah, like the process of how that takes place, or
Yeah,
the process
I'm
of
not
what?
familiar with Ableton at all, so I'm kind of just curious about how you build what you have in there a little bit more and how you
Absolutely.
divide between the house and what's going in your ears.
Absolutely. So I'm going to take one moment here, and I'm just going to fade into the background. Well, I'm going to go get my these in-ear packs that I carry for my travel setup, just so I want to show you. So just bear with me for one moment. I really fade back into the bookshelf there. Okay, so in a moment I'll show you the sort of on the go, lower budget, everybody gets their own mix solution that I came up with that has nothing to do with the interface that you choose. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to choose an interface that you feel pretty comfortable about using, that has a number of assignable outputs. Okay. And the interface that I use is a Tascam 18i20. You can also, a friend of mine he believes in Focusrite more than I do. And I also, for my home setup, I use Behringer products, just because they just so easily automatically assign to every computer environment that I plug in, that it's just a no-brainer for me to just, every time I plug in, I have a power switch that powers up an entire rack on my right-hand side, that including the light that's shining on me right now and my secondary screen and all of the things I use on a daily basis, including the headphone monitor, just all one thing. But anyways, back to this interface that you use. Let's say that you have 5. Let's say that you have 5 outputs. in the back. Okay, so actually I'll give two versions of this. Say one in one environment you have 3, in one environment you have 5, and ideally you'd have like 8 or 10 or something like that. In the universe in which you have 3, which you can, for the record, set up an SPD pad to replicate. You can set up an SPD pad to give multiple configurable different signals. Okay, just tuck that one in the back of your mind. Those of you who might use an SPD pad in the future. And if you don't know what an SPD pad is a drum pad with triggers. I'll get back to that. Okay, so back to this interface with 3 outputs. You would want to have the sound broken up one of 2 ways. One of them would definitely need to be the click or the Karen track that only feeds to the in-ear monitors, not to the on-stage wedges, only to the in-ear monitors. Okay. And the other 2 things could either be split up left and right stereo or high and low, or some configuration of that, where it's like weighted in one way that the house has literally any control over what it is that you're giving them. Literally just like anything. Otherwise, what they're going to do is they're going to put an EQ on it and then use that EQ to balance out your sound with the other things that are on stage, or just bring you up and down based on the loudest track in that mix. Now, let's say that we go to a 5 output configuration. One of those, again, is going to be Q, click, Karen. Okay, the Q is the Karen because Q in this sense means like to cue you that you're entering. The other 4, I would say, would be backup vocals, keys and guitar, horns, let's just say horns, synth, other effects, and most importantly, bass. Because the bass is going to be the thing that is going to be so different to the harmonic picture of what's happening that it's really going to be, how do I phrase this? It's going to be important for you to have that separate and laid out in a completely different space, so that when someone does push that throttle up on that particular knob on the fader board, that it's actually makes a difference in the house, that it actually makes a discernible difference in the house and makes a discernible difference in your ears. So that's what you would ideally in a 5 output setup, that's what you would have. And that's the way that you would, inside of Ableton, you would use the sends to send the different outputs to different 1/4 inch outputs again on the back of your interface. Okay, and then on the mixer in the actual venue, that's when you're going to want for them to say, oh, in this person's ears, I want to give them a little bit less of this, and this person's ears, I need to give them way more of this, and they're mixing every single one of those channels individually for your ears. So you may have to group, if you have a large group, you may have to group those together so that like all 4 of the horn players get the same mix. But by and large, you want to have some of those things separated out, especially if you're missing people, like a bass player, for example. You want to have all of those things separated out so that you can have a lot of control in people's ears and then also on the stage. And then I'll show you this thing here. These are very affordable. Just have a bunch of them. These little tiny units, you ever seen these online? These little guys here?
Maybe.
They're 2. I can pull it up on my Amazon too, so you can see. If I don't hold it close to my face, you won't be able to see it. Oh, am I still sharing my screen? No, right?
No.
No, we can see you. Yeah. And actually, I just for the folks here, I just got a set of these, so I'm happy to loan them out, bring them in, show them to you. So
oh my goodness, that is amazing. Well, go to Professor Schaefer's office and get your hands on these and just test them out. They work fine at a medium range, and line of sight is optimal between the transmitter and the receiver. And I just bought a couple packs of them so that everyone on stage can have their own mix. Go ahead, Tyler.
I was wondering if you had any like cutout issues with those, because I know like most of those are on the 2.4 band for RF.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the answer is yes. I have. So this was in DC. I had cutout issues, and it was because the paths had to cross each other, and that wasn't good. So after DC, we only had 2 more dates, and one of them was in actually we only had 1 more date, and it was in New York. And this is the last tour that I was on with using these. And what I did was I asked the house for, instead of giving me like plugging straight into the snake, just giving me some extra XLR length. And that way I put them reasonably close to where the person who was using that particular channel would be. And that was it. That was the end of that issue. So as long as, you know, that person's signal doesn't have to fight someone else's signal, you should be okay. But you're right. It's not like they're not as tried and true of in-ear monitoring systems as some of like the higher end stuff, but it is a great place to get started. You just have to combat certain issues like exactly what's the impedance, sorry, said the wrong first twice. Impedance that you may be up against. Good question, good point. Other questions? This is a very Ableton-centric conversation. Happy to continue on the Ableton route, though.
Well, maybe I can redirect us a bit and talk about career things.
Sure.
So, I mean, I know I would venture to guess that a lot of the students here are, you know, in the midst of their studies. They're thinking like, well, what do I do with this? Like, how do I really get started? And I'm just curious, like, you probably have students that are in the same scenario. And what do you have any general suggestions? How do you figure out how to get started? If you have just, you know, how do you, I guess maybe another more specific question would be, in terms of the portfolio career, how do you even identify the things that you're good at, you know, and where they'll find traction?
So that's a great question. A couple things about that. One of the things that you want to make sure that you're open and sort of receptive to is that information from other people. So are you asking other people like, well, what do you think I'm good at? What do you think, you know, what do you think I should do in this scenario? Because the way that other people perceive your skills may be different from how you perceive your own skills. They may say, yeah, you are such a great organizer. And you may say, I'm a great organizer. What are you talking about? Like, when have I ever portrayed that skill? And they might say, well, actually, in every single one of these rehearsals, you're the person that the conductor always uses to organize these particular things. Or whenever we go out, you know, you're the friend that makes sure that everybody makes it home or whatever. You know, these little tiny parts about our personalities and goings on, or personalities and sort of ideals and the frameworks that sort of bind us together. Those things often permeate all of our identity. So they'll sort of show up in other places. And, you know, if we're open enough to it and open enough to hearing it from other people, we can really sort of capitalize on that. And we can learn a lot just from listening to other folks. The other thing that I would say is that, you know, internally, just like listening to the sort of wind rustling through the trees, that's a metaphor that I use for composition. Whenever I'm talking to folks about composition or arranging or improvisation, learning improvisation, folks, those are places where people have to come up with ideas on their own, and they can feel uninspired some of the times. This is another space in which people can feel uninspired sometimes. Like, where should I go? What should I do? What am I good at? All those types of questions. And I would give the same type of advice, which is to listen to the rustling through the trees. And what I mean by that is you have to listen so intently some of the time to hear wind passing by branches. And imagine if it's difficult where you are. Can you just imagine me sitting in Manhattan, how difficult it is for me to, regardless of where one sits, you know, the challenge is still the same, to really quiet the things around oneself and understand, how can I actually hear the motif sort of forming underneath me? How can I hear or listen to the rhythm that I've already been living for the past semester, couple of years, whatever? How can I sort of capitalize on that motion to tell me where it is that I need to be going or spending time, or who it is that I like to be spending time with? And I have a saying also that is, Freud will always get you. Actually, the saying that I say more often, I'm not inclined to say because it involves some choice language about Sigmund Freud, but I'll paraphrase and say Freud is a son of a gun, okay? And he rarely lets you lie effectively about who you want to spend time with, about where you want to spend time, about what you want to spend time doing. He rarely lets you lie effectively. So if there's a certain thing that you're always late for, you probably don't want to be doing that thing. Now, again, that has nothing to do on your curricular obligation now to do that thing. It's just, will that work into your portfolio later? I don't know. I can't say for sure. Or if you're always dreading a particular type of, let's say, homework, or if you're dreading a particular type of like collegial relationship with your colleagues, and I do mean that full-heartedly, the people who you're networking with at this level in your life. If you're dreading something in particular and you can't really find the joy in that particular working relationship, you might want to analyze, well, what about this is something that I wouldn't want to include in my picture later? For some people, it might be, I'll give you a great example. A lot of people say, I don't want to be a teacher. You know who said, I said that. What I really meant is that I do not want to teach young children. And I went throughout my entire bachelor's of music degree every single time. And I was in a house of educators. And every time I would come home, do you think you want to be a music ed major yet? And I said, no, I don't really want to. I'm pretty confident in my path. This music business thing is really working out. I'm getting all these opportunities, yada, yada, yada. Every single time for years and years and years and years. And then ultimately, with no music education degree at the time, I got a job in a school. Well, maybe it's not that I didn't want to be a teacher, didn't want to be an educator, I didn't want to share in this space. That's not what it was. It was actually that I didn't want to teach a very particular age group. And I didn't want to teach a very particular, or what I thought was I had a closed view of what music education was at the time. I didn't want to teach a very particular type of music and music education. And it was that, and the lifestyle around that I was trying to avoid. But it took a long time for me to suss that out, for me to try and figure out what exactly is it that I don't like. It's like when people say they don't like a whole genre of food. And I go, that's ridiculous. Like if people say, I don't like Italian food. And I go, that's the craziest thing. The whole world of that food, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. I don't eat anything fried. Nothing. Have you had a fried Oreo once in your life? That's like, you know what I mean? Like you can't say about the whole thing. So whenever there's something that we don't like wholly, we might want to ask ourselves, well, why don't I like that thing? Or what is the component of that thing that I do not like? That's good advice for this. And that's also sort of good advice to think about if you're having like a dietary issue having to do with like inflammation or digestion or an intolerance of some kind. It was a practice that was really popular like many years ago, but it really should come back in a meaningful way where you like take everything out of your diet and then slowly reintroduce. It's a very painful thing with how many wonderful things there are to eat these days, but it is something that you might want to consider in some pockets where you remove things. You can do it the opposite direction too, where you sort of remove things 1 week at a time and sort of see from there, when you reintroduce it, what might cause you an issue. It's probably a much more popular these days way of going about it, rather than taking everything out, going back to, I don't know, lettuce and tea leaves. I don't know. I don't know what to eat. But I hope that sort of fields the question to some degree. When looking for inspiration as to where you might look next, you have a lot of lived experience. You have to really lean into that lived experience and say, well, what am I good at? And if you don't know what you're good at, ask somebody who knows you, because they'll tell you. They'll also tell you what you're not good at too, and you might be surprised. Any follow-up questions from the room on that topic?
So How exactly do you go about doing things that you aren't good at? So like you had a really cool bass groove in your Ableton thing. I know nothing about bass and struggle with making bass grooves. So how would you approach that kind of thing?
Well, you'd have to. It's sort of like have you ever taken medicine with like honey? Did you ever take medicine with a sweet thing when you were young? You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So most of us did in some way, shape, or form. So you have to, in some way, shape, or form, entice yourself to do it. So find some piece of music that you love. And if you haven't done any transcription exercises, you got to get in it. Get in the transcription exercises. There's no greater way of really getting in the head of the people recording the track, unless you're talking to them, you're talking to those people who recorded that thing, than transcribing, then trying to rebuild exactly what someone built, and then asking questions. Because the questions that you would come to, let's say that you were just talking about like playing, who knows, playing some sonata, whatever. You're playing something, you learn it from the sheet music. That's one way of learning it. But if you transcribe it from a recording, the questions you would have in your next studio session would be so different. Likewise, with recording this, if you talk to somebody about it, that's all good and fine. But who do you like the most, Bobby? Who do you like to listen to the most?
Like what band?
Band, person? What grooves for you?
Bon Jovi.
Bon Jovi. All right, bet. Okay. So let's say that you're listening to Living on the Prairie is Bon Jovi, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I've just, a lot of things going around my mind. I just want to make sure. Okay. So like that bass sound in and of itself, right? There's a lot that's going on there, right? But it sort of sounds like it's like vocoder, like that. If I had like an octave pedal on my microphone, I would totally kick it in right then. But like that sound is so interesting. The sound itself is interesting. Is that the same sound that's used over the whole track? I don't know. Is that track isolated and probably on YouTube somewhere? Probably. I'll go track that down and go try to build stuff on top of it and then recreate the track itself. That's a whole other way of like audio stenciling that we don't talk nearly enough about, is like try to find the one thing, build a whole house around it, take out the plumbing that you used from another house, and then rebuild your own plumbing. What a wild journey that would be. So that's just a little bit on that front of like, find someone who's doing it that you really like a lot, really, really like it, and you wouldn't let yourself stop it once you get going. And then figure out exactly what it is that they did. And that is like just a, hop, skip, jump back to Professor Schaefer's sort of question there. The same thing can be done for other things that you don't necessarily want to do. Like, let's say like accounting. Most people hate accounting. Understandable. Because if the numbers don't go in the way you want them to, it's bad. It's a very hurtful experience. What I would do is I would deduce successful, or I would sort of dissect successful modes of operation around things that I really, really like, whether those be companies, concert venues, people, performing acts, movies, anything that you really love. Like if you have a favorite movie, my favorite movie is probably Titanic. Nope, it's not. My second favorite movie is, my first favorite movie is National Treasure, the original version. I love it. But my flight movie is Titanic, because it'll get you going. It'll at least put you to sleep. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I would take apart in my mind, like, what was the financial picture of this particular work? Who was involved? How are these people involved? Because I know that I have sort of an intrinsic motivation to see this further. You have to find those spaces of intrinsic motivation. Listen to the rustling in the trees for the things that you like. And if you don't like it, you move on. Because that's the other thing about this. And I would say this actually goes for music education as well. If someone isn't responding to you, let's say you're an applied lessons instructor, and someone isn't responding to you, I almost all the time think it's a repertoire issue. Because if they were learning something that really inspired them, they would learn it. They would figure it out. They wouldn't be able to put it down. You wouldn't be able to get them to move on to the next week's thing. That's how big of a deal it would be for them. But in a lot of applied studio environments, that's sort of a push and pull. The teacher-centered idea of what it is that should be taught and the student-centered sort of desire to learn a particular thing. And a lot of times people don't know how to flex their own voice as well. So even asking the very question, like, who would you want to learn? What do you want to listen to? What do you want to do? What would you want to create? That can, scatter paralysis across a room a lot of the time. But, it's important to look within oneself and understand I'm giving something. I know that means something else now, like that's totally been co-opted. Like, oh, it's giving XYZ vibes. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you are telling a certain picture with your level of engagement. Like I said, Freud is a son of a gun and he'll always get you. He will tell you if you want to be in a certain place. He will tell you if you like a particular type of repertoire. He'll tell you all these different things. And it's up for you to figure out, well, what components of this do I like? What components of this do I not like? Back in the blue on the right-hand side of the room.
Me? Or-
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, all right. I did have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of music education specifically was it that you didn't like? Because I'm in a similar boat. I help teach math, but I do not like teaching children if I can avoid it.
Sure. Yeah, I think it was primary school education, meaning really grades K through 5. I just did a middle school all county about 5 weeks ago, and it was a joy. It was really a joy. And they were just at a certain spot where I could tell them something, talk to them about something in the improvisational realm, and it was like mind-blowing, like utterly mind-blowing. None of them knew what an omnibook was. Maybe of you may not know what an omnibook is. That's totally okay. But it's a book of transcriptions, and now they make them for like everybody. They used to just make them for Charlie Parker, and now they make them for a wide range of people. So you can find note for note transcriptions of Oscar Peterson. What? If you learn one of Oscar Peterson's waterfalls, you're good. That's pretty much it. That's what he had. That's sort of a term used to characterize his style of playing, like waterfalls of sound. If you listen to it, you can see why it might be called that. But I liked dealing with those folks, and high school groups I also liked dealing with, but it was particularly difficult when I taught at a high school with no feeder program. So what I mean by that is there was no middle school ushering kids in with some foundational understanding. These were students in Brooklyn who had no music training at all, and were likely to have repeated or to repeat a grade while they were there. Just to give you a picture of the overall educational picture. And they were still, very deserving of a music education, very deserving of a way of appreciating and making music for themselves and for others. And there was plenty of talent and plenty of ideas in that space. But ultimately, my spirit couldn't survive there either. And I ultimately had to leave. And it was one of the hardest things that I ever did. But I had to tell myself I wasn't ready to die yet. And what I meant by that was that if I had stayed there, it would have destroyed my relationship with music. It would have destroyed my relationship with education. It would have destroyed my relationship with everything that I love. And I wouldn't have been able to shine my light any further. So I had to leave. That was really, really difficult to do. But back to your initial question, I knew that it was primary school at the time. And it turns out that it was most of primary, anything that's not post-secondary wasn't really for me in the types of conversations that I wanted to have. But here and there, I can certainly get into it with some younger folks as well. Good question.
Yeah, Chris, I don't think you can see, maybe you scoot a little bit this way.
Yeah. So all right, now that we're all right, okay. Oh God. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. All right, man. Now that we're past the deep talk, I kind of wanted to circle back to Ableton and just ask if you'd ever made any use out of Session View for like live performance.
For live performance, that's a really good question. And for those people who don't know, you said your name was Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. I on this particular concert have not, but I did in Logic Session View. You familiar with Logic Session View?
I've never used Logic.
It's the same thing. It's a similar kind of like box oriented view. For those who don't know what it is that Chris is talking about, there are two ways in which you can view Ableton. This is the linear view, often referred to as a track view, different ways of calling this thing. And then this over here is the sort of scene based view that sort of clicks from left to right. And whenever you play these, it'll play all of the tracks that are here at the same time before moving on to the next thing. And the beauty in that is that you can have multiple scenes sort of playing at the same time across different pictures. And they're all synced to a click. So when you jump from one to the other, I'm going to try to open up another file over here so to show people how this thing can be used. When you hop from one thing to another, it will wait until the beat one of the next place where you're supposed to be, and then jump to that space. Chris, do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, a little bit. There was a video I watched where someone was messing around with the follow-up on it. You said like you can transition like after a set number of bars, but that's something that you can just change as far as I'm aware.
Yeah,
Like, scenes can move at completely not different tempos, but maybe at different rhythms.
yes. Yeah, that's totally up to you to decide. You can decide that a scene is moved at you can decide that a scene is moved immediately. You can decide that the scene is moved after a bar. You can decide that the scene is moved after every 4 bars if you wanted to. And that, again, I have more experience with that in the realm of Logic, just because it's a little easier to dive in and sort of idiosyncratically understand. That's sort of the best way I feel about Logic. Exactly what it is that you're seeing, exactly what you're impacting. And also, the interesting thing about the way that Logic shows the files is that it shows the files in like a circular, how do I phrase this? It's like a circular thumbnail of the region itself, which is really interesting, versus the sort of like you take a box and then you just are in that box until you move on, and you have to remember what was in that box the entire time. That's the way the Ableton sort of functions.
Yeah.
But was your question more broadly if I had experience with that, or like how that could be helpful, or what was it?
Just if you had used it and how you used it, essentially. Because
Sure. Yeah, so I'll talk about how I've seen it used. I've seen it used often with, I've seen it used 2 ways. Once with a type of a controller that can edit. I don't have one of them here with me.
you're talking about one of like the launch pads.
Yeah, like either a launch pad or like an 8x8 button switcher, any of those types of things. But a launch pad is a great example of one where the launch pad components do something specific. So automatically they're going to be set to be playing those particular scenes in a grid. So let's say, because this particular one isn't set up this way, it isn't set up to do this particular thing. So I'm not going to reshare my screen with this particular one. So I think it might be confusing.
Yeah, I think Launchpad is actually the good one, because that like will sync up. Like the grid of the Launchpad is like essentially the same, right?
Exactly.
So
It's like locks in immediately. And that's the other thing is you want to have technological integrations that'll definitely work for you and not against you most of the time. But in that one, it's going to pretty much automatically link up so that when you click a certain box, it's going to go to that box in the sort of left to right grid of what you see on your computer and what you see on your pad. You can also, though, tell, just like with any piece of MIDI information, which is what makes MIDI so magical. You can tell the interpreter to take the second box in the row and just make that a forward switch, and the third box in the row as a reverse. They'd probably do the opposite. But and then the fourth box could be like a kill. And then the boxes after that could be like jump switches. So like you can jump a couple scenes ahead and jump a couple scenes back and do that kind of a thing. You can also set up a launch pad just like that. You can basically set it up to do whatever it is that you want. That way, as you're moving sort of, left to right through the scenes, you can say, I want the drums from the bridge while the background vocals from the chorus are playing.
I think in
And-
Ableton, it's called like a, oh my God, I just blanked on the name for it and I literally had it in my head. Like a follow through or like, no, I blanked on the name. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not quite sure where you are, but I do want to get to where you are.
Follow-up actions. Yeah, they have
Sure.
follow-up
Okay.
actions for the,
So you're talking about the follow-up actions inside of the Ableton session itself, yeah?
Yeah, that's how you do all the bouncing around, I think.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That you can tell it to do that bouncing around if you'd like to, or you can, in the session view, you can click around to the components that you actually want to trigger at the same time, or the scene view, I guess I should say. You can click around to the different components that you want to see happening at the same time, and then make them happen simultaneously to give some type of new life to your piece. It's really like a beautiful way of using the technology. It seems like you're on a journey. Like you're about it.
It's I sometimes have a lot of trouble arranging, so I get lost in the session sometimes, the session view.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I mean, yeah, that's sometimes how I feel as well, is like it's not as descriptive enough as I want it to be, and the markers aren't enough some of the time. So I don't know. I mean, I could go back and forth on this. I feel like, much like with my whole Freud thing about knowing where your sort of zone of genius lies, it's almost like, hey, maybe try another DAW. Maybe try something with like easier color descriptions denoting where something starts, stops, ends. But it is really nice to have those follow through actions, because that's not something that exists in other places in a really, really meaningful way. And then, can you remind me, you were talking about the session view or the scene view?
I didn't know they were different things. The session view, the scene view.
Yeah. So when we're talking about,
You mean, is the scene the arrangement view? Because that's what I always call it. The one with the timeline.
the one with the timeline, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And you had a question about the other, correct?
I was just asking like how, if you had used it or like how you had seen it, or if
Sure.
you've seen anything special with it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I have seen definitely the jumping around is such a special, like, sort of dream state enabling thing that only Ableton can really do in a meaningful way. And you have to sort of like trust the program to do what you want, because like you said, it can get pretty confusing. It can get pretty confusing when you're arranging things and maybe you lose sight of an idea that you had, or lose sight of an integration of ideas that you had. So yeah, Godspeed. Yeah.
Maybe.
Good continued luck.